I wasn't looking for anything when I found the letters. I was just cleaning out my grandmother's attic 3 days after her funeral, running on grief and autopilot. The farmhouse smelled like cedar, mothballs, and the stale perfume she wore every day for 60 years. June Ellis, stoic, meticulous, always sharp as a tack. If you'd asked me a week ago who she was, I'd have told you she was a proud woman, a little too blunt, but decent. Solid. Predictable. But everything I thought I knew about her began to unravel the second I opened a plain, beat-up cardboard box buried under Christmas decorations and old sewing kits. It wasn't labeled, just taped shut with brittle yellow masking tape. Inside were stacks of aged envelopes bundled with delicate string, each one addressed in careful cursive, Thomas Whitaker. The postmarks were from 1951 through 1953. I stared at the name for a long time. My grandfather's name was Robert. I opened one. My dearest Thomas. I read the whole thing in silence, heart pounding, hands shaking. The words were tender, pleading. She talked about missing his voice, about the last night they spent together before he shipped out, about how war had changed the shape of the world and of him. The next letter was more raw. She wrote about silence, about how she kept writing even though he never replied, about wondering if he was dead or simply choosing not to come back. And yet every line was soaked with love. Not the convenient, neighbor-approved kind she had with Robert. This was the kind that cracks people open. There were dozens more. I didn't stop reading until dawn. And then came the last one. It wasn't addressed to Thomas. It was addressed to the child I'll never meet. That's when I stopped breathing. My grandmother had been pregnant. She'd written about the joy, the fear, the way she'd whisper promises to her unborn child at night. And then she wrote about bleeding, about pain, about praying she'd wake up and find it had all been a nightmare. She never told anyone, not even Robert. She lost the baby and the man. In the final paragraph, she says Thomas was declared missing in action. But the way she wrote it, in quotation marks, like she didn't believe it, like she knew something more, it chilled me. It didn't feel like mourning. It felt like betrayal. I left the attic that morning with my whole body shaking. I couldn't look at her house the same way. It wasn't just where Grandma baked pies and taught me to play cards. It was where she buried an entire life. A love no one spoke of. A child no one knew existed. I didn't go to work that day. Or the next. Instead, I packed a bag, loaded up my car, and made a decision I couldn't explain to anyone, not even myself. I was going to find out who Thomas Whitaker was. Where he went. If he ever came back. If he ever knew he was supposed to be a father. That's how I ended up at the tiny historical society in Fairhaven, flipping through brittle newspaper archives. I'd only been searching an hour when I saw it. July 12, 1952. Local soldier declared missing, presumed deserted. And there was his face. A black and white photo of a man no older than I am now. He looked haunted. Lean, sharp-cheeked. The caption confirmed what I already knew. Thomas Whitaker. U.S. Army. Went AWOL 6 months prior. Never returned. I didn't even realize I was crying until the archivist gently asked if I needed a moment. I lied. Said it was just a family name. That I didn't think it would be emotional. But it was. Because if Thomas had deserted, then why did June keep writing? Why did she still call him my love 2 years later? And what if he wasn't missing? What if he had never left? I drove back to the farmhouse with the clipping in my passenger seat like it might answer me if I stared at it long enough. The phrase presumed deserted circling my mind like a vulture, chewing on the edges of everything I thought I knew, everything I thought was safe, because desertion wasn't death and it wasn't closure, and if Thomas hadn't died, if he'd chosen to disappear, then it meant my grandmother had spent her entire life living a lie inside a life she didn't choose. And maybe she never stopped waiting for him to return. Maybe every Thanksgiving and every wedding anniversary and every single quiet morning with Grandpa Robert was haunted by the ghost of a man who wasn't dead, just gone. And for the first time in my life, I wondered if Grandma June had ever really loved the man she married, or if she just buried her real love 6 feet deep in silence. And I knew I had to find someone, anyone, who could tell me what really happened to Thomas Whitaker, so I did what desperate people do. I chased shadows, starting with the byline on that article, a woman named Helen Mathis, who had died in the 90s but still had a grandson living in Fairhaven, Mark Mathis, who ran a tiny print shop down by the lake and looked at me funny when I showed up asking about an article printed before he was born. But when I explained why I was there and showed him the photo of Thomas and the letters from June, his face changed, softened into something close to shock, and he said his grandmother had talked about that story once, said it haunted her. Not because she got it wrong, but because she suspected she hadn't gotten the whole truth. And when I asked if she ever said anything about June, his answer broke something in me. She slammed the door in my grandma's face, he said. Told her Thomas wasn't a traitor. Said anyone who printed otherwise was part of the reason he didn't come home. That night I didn't sleep, just paced the creaky floorboards of June's house until I couldn't take it anymore and started tearing through every closet, every photo album, every drawer of ancient receipts and brittle black and whites, and just when I was ready to give up, I found it. A photo tucked behind the glass in a frame, almost like it was hidden, showing June in her 20s sitting on a dock, a man's arm around her shoulder, and even though his face was half-turned, I knew it was him. Thomas, same eyes, same lean frame, same sad mouth, and on the back, in faded ink, 2 initials. T+J, summer 1951, and I just sat there staring at it for what felt like forever because it was real, all of it, and if he hadn't died, and if the baby didn't make it, then maybe, just maybe, Thomas started a new life somewhere else and I had to know, so I dug into every public record I could find, tracked down a Detroit address listed under his name in 1953, a dusty rental apartment above a hardware store, and I got in my car and drove 3 hours like my whole body was moving faster than my brain, hard in my throat the entire way, and when I got there, the building was still standing, only now it was a hipster coffee shop with overpriced croissants and Edison bulbs, and I walked in, asked the barista if she knew anything about the building's history, and when I said Thomas's name, she froze, and I swear to God I forgot how to breathe when she said, Thomas Whitaker? My dad used to talk about him. Said he was the best mechanic he ever worked with. Quiet guy. Kept to himself. Left in the middle of the night with a little girl, red hair, he said, like her mother. Never came back. I must have looked like I'd been punched because she leaned in and asked if I was okay. And I couldn't even speak because everything I thought I knew just exploded. Because June didn't lose the baby. She was told she did. They let her believe it, grieve it, carry the silence like it was hers alone. But she didn't lose the baby. Thomas took her. Not to escape, but to protect. Because someone somewhere decided it was safer that way. And now I had a family I'd never met, and a truth I couldn't bury again. I sat in my car outside the coffee shop for over an hour, engine off, Thomas's name echoing in my head like a warning and a promise all at once, because that tiny piece of truth that he had left with a little red-haired girl changed everything. It made me question not just the story Grandma June had hidden, but the entire architecture of our family history, like there was this missing piece shoved into the shadows on purpose, a ghost limb no one talked about, and it suddenly became terrifyingly clear that there was someone out there with my blood running through their veins who had no idea I existed, who probably had no idea who they were, and maybe, just maybe, their whole life had been built on a lie just like mine was about to be. So I started digging again, obsessively, compulsively, trying to piece together where Thomas went after Detroit, pulling DMV records, checking old apartment registries, tracing any Whitaker family in the Midwest with the right age or background or any mention of a red-headed child, and for a while it felt like chasing smoke, like every lead dried up the second I touched it, but then I found it, a utility bill from 1955 under the name T. Whitaker in a town called Grayson, Ohio. And something in my gut told me this was it, this was where he ran, where he started over, and I barely slept that night, just packed a bag and hit the road again, and when I rolled into Grayson the next morning, it was like stepping into a time capsule. The kind of place with one grocery store, a barber shop with spinning candy-striped poles, and a diner that hadn't changed the font on its menu since 1962. I walked into the county clerk's office like I had a right to answers. Showed the woman behind the counter my ID and a copy of the bill, told her I was researching a family genealogy project, and her eyes narrowed like she knew I wasn't telling the whole truth but also didn't care enough to call me out. She pulled a file from the archives and said, Thomas Whitaker, yeah, he lived in town for a few years, worked at the auto plant, kept to himself, had a little girl named Sarah, and my heart cracked straight down the middle because that was it, that was her name, my aunt, my blood, and she would have been, what, 70 now, maybe still living, maybe with kids, maybe with grandkids, an entire branch of my family tree that had been sawn off and left to rot for decades, and then the clerk said something that stopped everything cold, you'll want to talk to her daughter, I think she still lives out by the lake, and I nodded like my brain was still attached to my body, wrote down the address she gave me, and drove there in silence, too scared to play music. Too numb to think about anything but how I was about to knock on the door of a woman who might be my cousin or my half-cousin or some kind of sister in the emotional sense of the word, and when I pulled into the driveway, I felt like I was walking into a memory that didn't belong To me, the house was simple: white siding, a sagging porch swing, flower beds in need of weeding, and I almost turned around and drove away, but something, maybe grief, maybe rage, maybe hope, forced me to get out and knock, and when the door opened, I saw her. Maybe late 40s, short auburn curls, freckles across her cheeks just like my mother's, and before I could say a word, she said, "You're here about Thomas, aren't you?" And I just nodded because I couldn't speak, and she stepped aside and let me in like she'd been waiting for me for years, like this moment had been hanging in the air forever. And the second I stepped into her house, I saw the photo on the wall, a faded black and white of a man in uniform, standing next to a red-haired girl in a gingham dress, and I whispered, "That's him," and she said, "Yeah, that's my grandfather. And that's my mom, Sarah. But if you're here to ask about what happened to them, I need you to sit down because the truth isn't what you think. My mother didn't die in a car accident like the papers said. She was taken. And no one ever came looking for her." I didn't know what I expected her to say, but it wasn't that. Taken. The word rattled around in my head like a misfired bullet. She introduced herself as Ellie, Thomas's granddaughter, Sarah's only child. Her voice was calm, but there was a tension behind her eyes that made it clear this wasn't some old family rumor or embellishment. We sat down at her kitchen table, and I felt like I was sitting in a courtroom waiting for a verdict. "My mom never talked about her childhood," she said. "She just couldn't. Any time I asked, she'd shut down like someone had unplugged her from the inside. But when I was 16, she had a breakdown. Paranoid, screaming about shadows, about someone coming back for her. I thought she was delusional. Then she showed me the scar." Ellie rolled up her sleeve and pointed to a thin, jagged line on her upper arm. She said someone hurt her, that she and her dad ran because they were being watched. That someone from the military wanted her gone. She wouldn't give names, wouldn't explain, just cried and said it was all her fault. I could barely breathe. Why would anyone want to hurt her? I asked, and Ellie gave a bitter laugh. Because of what she remembered. Or maybe what she knew. My grandfather, Thomas, wasn't just a deserter. He saw something overseas. Something he wasn't supposed to. And he didn't run because he was scared. He ran because they told him to disappear or his family would pay the price. My skin went cold. This wasn't just a love story gone wrong, it was something bigger. Something dangerous. Did she ever talk about my grandmother? I asked. Ellie nodded slowly. Only once. Said she used to have dreams about a woman crying through the walls. Said she thought it was her mother's voice. She didn't know if it was real or something she made up. I wanted to scream. My grandmother lived the rest of her life thinking Thomas had abandoned her when in reality he was trying to keep their daughter safe. What happened to him? I asked. Ellie's mouth tightened. He died when I was 8. Car accident. But there's more. Something I've never told anyone. She stood up and disappeared into a back room, and when she returned, she was holding a shoebox wrapped in an old towel. Inside were cassette tapes. He recorded these. Said if anything happened to him, someone needed to know the truth. I've never listened to them. I was too scared. But maybe it's time we both heard what he had to say. She held out the first tape and her hand was shaking. Do you want to hear it? I nodded, heart pounding so loud I could barely think. She slid the tape into an old player, pressed play, and after a hiss of static, I heard the voice side only read on yellowed pages. If you're hearing this, I'm probably gone. And if they're still watching, then I don't have much time. The moment his voice came through the speakers, I felt it in my bones, like hearing a ghost speak your name. Thomas sounded nothing like I imagined. Not broken. Not afraid. Just tired. Deeply, endlessly tired. They told me to keep quiet. They told me to forget what I saw, his voice said, low and slow like he was trying not to wake someone nearby. But I can't. I won't. June deserves the truth. So does Sarah. So does anyone who finds this. He paused and I could hear the sound of him breathing, like even the act of recording was dangerous. It happened in Korea. Late 1951. We were on a recon mission near a site no one was supposed to be near. An old village completely wiped out. Only not by bombs. Something else. We found bodies. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. No wounds. No blood. Just empty. Like they'd been drained. Like something pulled the life out of them. I looked at Ellie, but she was already staring at the recorder like it was on fire. I told my superior. Big mistake. The next morning I was reassigned to a different unit. They said the mission was confidential. Said the files would be sealed permanently. But I knew what I saw. And I wasn't the only one. 3 of us went in. I was the only one who came out. The others disappeared. Officially? Killed in action. Unofficially? I think they were silenced. Just like they tried to silence me. The tape clicked and went dead, but there were more. We played the next one. This time, the voice was shakier. Older. I tried to live a normal life. I really did. But I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder. Every time a car followed me too long. Every time the phone clicked. And then, June wrote me. I hadn't heard from her in months. She said she was pregnant. I was ready to come home. I was going to turn myself in. But the next day, someone showed up at my door. A man in uniform. He told me she lost the baby. That she was better off without me. That if I contacted her again, she'd disappear too. That's when I knew. I couldn't go back. Ellie turned off the tape. The room was spinning. They lied to her, I whispered. They let her believe he left by choice. Ellie nodded, voice hoarse. And he lived the rest of his life trying to protect a family that didn't even know he existed. We sat in silence until Ellie said the one thing that knocked the air out of me. There's one more tape. I haven't listened to it yet. It's labeled with a date. The day he died. She looked at me, eyes wide, scared. Do you want to hear his last words? And without waiting for an answer, she slid in the final tape. Static. Then the sound of Thomas whispering, voice strained and shaking. I think they found me. The tape hissed louder this time, like even the machine knew something was wrong, like it didn't want us to hear what came next, but we did, and nothing could have prepared me for the way Thomas's voice cracked, like his body was giving out but his mind was still running. Desperate to get the words out before it was too late. If this is the last thing I ever say, please, someone find her, find Sarah. They told me she died in that fire when she was a teenager, but I never believed it. They covered it up just like they covered up the rest. I think she found something they didn't want her to know, and now they're coming for me to erase the last loose end. He coughed hard then, and we could hear him moving, maybe trying to hide, maybe already too late. And then his voice dropped to a whisper so faint we had to lean in close to catch it. I should have gone back for June. I should have fought harder, but I thought keeping them safe meant staying gone. I thought disappearing would protect them. I was wrong. If anyone hears this, please, tell her I loved her. I never stopped, and then a loud bang, like something hit the door, and the tape cut out, silence swallowing everything, and I felt something deep inside me collapse because that was the end, the last breath of a man who ran not out of fear but out of love. A man who gave up everything to keep a secret no one asked him to carry, and for what? June lived the rest of her life believing she was abandoned, Thomas died thinking his daughter was murdered, and Sarah, whoever she became, lived in fear, haunted by memories she couldn't explain, and yet somehow, none of them knew the full story. None of them knew that every thread of their lives had been pulled by hands they never saw, that silence and shame had built an entire family legacy in shadows, and now it was mine to hold, mine to carry forward or burn to the ground, and for the first time since I found that cardboard box in the attic, I understood what had really been passed down through generations. It wasn't just blood or trauma or names, it was silence, heavy and smothering, and I had a choice to make, because if Sarah really survived the fire, if she was still out there, then someone had lied again, and maybe she didn't want to be found, or maybe she needed help and no one had ever come, and either way I knew I couldn't stop now, so I turned to Ellie and said, we need to find her, and Ellie nodded without hesitation like she'd been waiting years for someone else to finally say it out loud, and as we stood there, the air around us felt charged like a storm was finally breaking after decades of stillness. Because the story wasn't over, not yet, and maybe the truth was buried, but it wasn't lost, not anymore.